Welcome back to Be Poke on Point. I sincerely apologize for missing in action for about 2 months. I had a lot going on. I had some huge challenges to deal with and then some wonderful things to also share with you in future episodes. I'm a bit sick right now, as you can probably tell from my voice, but I just really wanted to release the second episode of True Story, A Woman's Escape from an Abusive Marriage. So in this episode, Jasmine is going to reveal to you some of the revengeful tactics used by her partner. And in general, I've seen these a lot when a child is involved or children. We're actually also going to look at the financial abuse that she went through and his tactic, how he was able to do that. There's a theme that we see in this episode, and it's funny because when I was re-listening to it today, so I can post it for you and share her amazing story, the theme of piecing pieces of information together to create, or like pieces of a puzzle together so everything makes sense, that happens in relationships, it happens in your professional career, in your personal life, etc. And this actually happened to me in the last few months as well. So it was amazing that you begin to understand life's mysteries and the weird, crazy, sometimes horrible things that happen to you and why they happen to you, but you really start to understand that actually this is a blessing in disguise, or hopefully you begin to look at it in a positive way. So without further ado, let's begin the rest of her story.
So was there a restraint against him?
There was not, mainly because the officers were sort of advising me that if you put this too formally into the system, now this will not be the case everywhere, and I'm not recommending against going this route. I'm just telling you what happened in my situation.
Yeah.
But if you put this into situation into the system, you could end up having a lot of difficulty with, child custody and these other issues. So, they said, you need to change your locks. Do you have a friend you can go stay with for the night till you change your locks? We are going to put your house on what's called a 15-minute patrol. So every 15 minutes, the police in that very short time determined, based on his responses and his attitude, that my life was in danger.
Yeah.
So my street had what's called the 15-minute patrol. So as there's patrol cars that sort of just drive around the neighborhoods where their only job is to patrol. They're not doing anything else. They're not giving parking tickets. They're not, answering calls on like this situation, a domestic situation. Their job is to just patrol to keep neighborhoods safe. So this car would come by every 15 minutes. I was lucky that I left to the next city that night. Within 15 minutes of this happening, I had kind of packed a bag and packed the baby and I stayed with a friend for the night.
Okay.
I got up in the morning. I had breakfast. I said, I need to be thinking clearly. Went back to the condo in the day. The same neighbors that I had given that bottle of champagne to came, changed my locks for me.
Oh, wow.
I called my family that was in a different country at the time. Right. They had actually just finished visiting. Okay. And I think that that's also very key in the timing of how all this happened. So it was an accumulation of events. One, finding out I had received the title of doctor. Yeah. Also, I had my mom come and visit to help with the newborn so I could finish that PhD.
Did he get along with your mom?
I do. But she
did
left,
he?
and she lives in a different country. So I think his thinking was, she just left. She's not coming back. This person's going to be isolated.
Was he doing anything harmful to you while your mom was there?
Yeah. So unfortunately, at this point, he was really just unable to control his temper. So, while things were very hidden, people met him towards the beginning of my relationship and said, what a nice guy, what a great guy. He's so friendly. Now we were at the point where also his thinking is, based on my mom's cultural background and sort of old-fashioned personality, I'm now married with a child. I don't think he was thinking that she could really affect the dissolution of this relationship, right?
Right. Yeah.
So, so there was this accumulation of events. I'm now by myself with the baby. I've completed this, part of the reason my mom came was, one, to help with the fact that I had a newborn and to see me, kind of complete my PhD. So this was all, very important stage in my life.
Yeah.
So I called, and my family kind of turned back around after having gone back
Wow.
to their country for a day, and came back, within a week. I think there was a 1 week in between. Within a week, they came back.
Yeah. You're very lucky
And
to have
that's
that support.
that was the end of the marriage. And then it turned to, how do we deal with this legally now that there's a child involved?
Mhm. Did you wanna talk about, so, your legal status in that country? It's up to you how much you wanna share, but I remember that there were some issues where he tried to, you know, abuse his power, let's say, for lack of better words, to try and get you not to leave, right? Because at this point, I think you were also ready to go back home and live with your family.
Right. So, okay. So let me start by saying that um there was a couple different things that also happened in the span of this relationship besides the temper and the psychological abuse.
Okay.
So I had always had a desire to return to my home country, to be with my parents when they got older. In my opinion, it was the superior country, and I was simply visiting the country of my ex-husband for educational purposes. Um, I had started the process of getting his citizenship and paperwork done in my home country.
Okay.
In the country I was studying in, I had always been either on a work permit or on a student visa. I had no desire to really settle there permanently. And he had suggested to me at some point in our marriage, why don't you just put an application through marriage? We're married now. It will be a lot faster. And if we have kids, it will be a lot better if you have, a dual citizenship kind of situation in
Okay.
terms of, getting medical insurance and all these other things that were, very complicated and involved explanations of why I should do this. So at some point, I did make that application. And this goes sort of to this story I'm telling you, but also just kind of as a general point. One of the ways the narcissist seeks to control someone after they've managed to break free of a relationship is um in kind of the post-parenting challenges, right? Fighting for custody, for example, for a child that they have no interest in and don't
Yes.
want, simply to
Yes.
hurt the other parent.
Yes.
Withholding child support to make you financially burdened. Um, you know, uh, Being overly litigious in litigation on issues that have no merit in court, just to keep dragging you back into court over and over again. So these are some
Right.
of the tactics that are used kind of in the aftermath of this situation, where they haven't actually realized that they've lost control of this situation. So they see, what can I do to hurt the other person?
Yep.
So my ex-husband had a very particular tactic that he was able to use, was that my uh, student visa, my work permit, well, you can only have one status in this country, one immigration status in this country at the time. At the
Mhm.
time of our breakup, my immigration status was directly attached to being married to him in
Oh,
a
no.
legitimate marriage. Your marriage is considered illegitimate if you have separated and are no longer together and are now pursuing divorce proceedings.
Okay.
Um, so he decided that one thing he could do that he knew would hurt me the most was try to take my child away.
Mhm.
So he decided that he could call immigration and inform them that we are now separated and we are getting divorced, and that he wants to cancel my application. The problem with this is kind of a legal technicality, is that you could go into a status of something else. Because 1 year after you graduate, for 1 year after you graduate, under the policies that existed at that time, you can get an extension of a work permit to look for
Okay.
employment. But that 1 minute, that 1 hour where this status is canceled and you're able to apply for a new status, you're considered illegal during that interim period. Once you're considered out of status, it's required that you leave the country, reapply from wherever, and then come back in on the correct status. The
Did he
problem
know
was
this?
that I couldn't simply do that. I couldn't do that because I couldn't cross an international border with a child without a permission to travel from their father. So I was in a jam. So my status gets canceled and I'm not able to actually leave unless I'm willing to leave my child behind, which was, completely out of the question.
Of
This was
course.
during the era of, immigration detention camps and really kind of stringent policies and hatred towards immigrants. Um, Now, what I did was, of course, I would did what I thought was the correct way to deal with this. I went to see a lawyer and I said, "This is my situation. There has to be something built into our system that can account for and deal with this situation." And she said, "You know what? We can make a
Mhm.
petition to relocate with the child, where a judge can override a father's lack of permission to cross an international border with a court order."
Okay.
So I put this act, I said, "Go ahead." I've been given, 2 weeks by immigration authorities to leave. It was about 3 days after that I was able to contact the lawyer, and I go, "I'm going to end up in a detention camp without my daughter if I don't leave voluntarily within this time period that they've given me."
What a nightmare. What
So
a serious
in
nightmare.
this place that I was in, you have any kind of legal document like this that's filed in family court, you have usually around 30 days to respond. You give the other side 30 days to respond. The problem was at this point, I only had less than 2 weeks to deal with this matter. And it's kind of, again, there was some sort of, higher intervention here where I think I got really lucky in this situation. So the lawyer puts in this, what they call application for a temporary order to relocate. It's considered temporary because they haven't had an opportunity to litigate whether this should be a permanent relocation or not, which is something that I did do down the road later on and was successful in. Um, and it gets to the court and it gets to the clerk of the court, and she has the whole stack of cases in front of her, and she's reading through, deciding what should be put forward to the judge as, needing to be dealt with. And she reads mine, and somehow she takes a particular interest in it. So she calls my lawyer back and says, "Your client only has this much time." This is the person working at the court. "But if you
Yeah.
resend me that same petition and you put the word emergency before it, once you put the word emergency before it, that 30-day time period doesn't apply anymore." So my lawyer does that. She puts emergency petition to relocate, sends it back. The clerk of the court calls her, says, "I'm going to put it on the top, so it's the first paper that the judge sees." I get a call the next morning. I don't know why, why everybody was working so early. Normally you like 9 to 5. Get a call at 7 o'clock in the morning and says, "Can you be in court in 2 hours?
Wow.
We're gonna hear your petition." So, the judge, the clerk of the court, my lawyer took an interest in this matter very seriously and was able to accelerate that. So I go to court. That was an interesting process. If you talk about, psychology and trauma, what was that like? I went in the court and I was asked to explain a number of things. And I was granted that emergency temporary order to relocate with my daughter to another country. And I came out and I went to my mom and I said, "They didn't call for any witnesses. It's just a temporary order. We'll have to litigate it later. That's why they only took 15 minutes. My
Mhm.
mom looked at me and she told me, "You've been in court for 4 hours." You know,
Oh,
I had
wow.
no idea that I had been talking for 4 hours straight to this judge and to this other lawyer. I had felt like I had just gone in. And it's kind of that experience. If you're someone that studied a lot and you do an exam, you go in and you've been in this 3 hour exam and it feels like 10 minutes have gone by because you're under such high
Yeah.
stress, right?
Yeah, or any, like, undergrad or graduate exams. Yeah,
Anything
I
like
know.
that. So
Mhm.
it was, amazing to me that I had actually, been in the courtroom that long. Like I had absolutely no idea. It didn't feel like that because you have this adrenaline where you're trying to save your life, you're trying to save your daughter's life.
Yeah,
You
you're
don't
in
want to be
survival mode.
separated. Yeah, you don't want to be
Yeah.
separated, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, so it was that was a kind of an interesting thing to me. And even when I think back now, it still feels like it was 15 minutes. It doesn't feel like it was 4 hours.
Yeah.
So that was very interesting. So I was granted that temporary order to relocate, and down the road, that issue was litigated in full, and I was given the permanent order to relocate.
Okay. Good. We're moving towards happy endings.
Yes.
Before I ask about the final divorce and the custody and all of that, I remember you also mentioned, because I see this in different like domestic violence situations or relationships that I know of. I think everyone by this point knows someone who's in one or has been in one. But I remember you telling me about some financial abuse or financial fraud. Is there any like key lessons that you could share with the audience about that? If you want to go into the story of how you found out about it, because of course it was happening, behind your back, or what to look out for in terms of financial abuse or financial fraud.
So, this is one of the other reasons why I didn't want to focus on physical abuse, because there was so much psychological abuse happening in my relationship, which would have stood at the same point that it got to with just that. Financial abuse is another one of those things that people find it difficult to pinpoint that this is a form of abuse that you're undergoing. But it's actually one of the most detrimental forms of abuse. It usually
Mhm.
comes in the form of someone being financially reliant on the other person and thus unable to leave, right? Because of
Yes.
that dependency issue.
Yes.
In my situation, uh, there was financial abuse happening that I was not aware of through my whole relationship. So I was a student at the time, I was working part time, I had a low income. And when you have low income, there's often a number of community programs that would file your taxes for free for you because you are in that low income or you are in that student category. So I went to an organization that was going to do my taxes for me for free. And one of the conditions of being able to get your taxes done for free is that you have to undergo this like 30-minute financial responsibility and training course. And as part of that financial responsibility and training course, they do a soft pull of your credit score so that you know where your credit is and so you can have better financial management skills moving forward. So I said, okay, I'm going to do the course so I can get my taxes filed. No big deal. It's a soft pull of my credit, meaning that it won't adversely affect my credit score. Um, and I get my credit back and I go, it was extremely low. And I say, how could my credit score be so low? I'm extremely responsible. I don't live outside my means. I pay all my bills on time and so on and so forth. I go, that's impossible. I never had a late payment in my life. Um, and they're like, no, this is what it's showing. There are three major credit unions here, and this is the score that they're showing for all of them. And I said, okay. So there's like, let me print out some more details for you. And the representative in the training is telling me, look, this is showing this credit card did this credit card in your name, you had this many late payments, you have this much interest on it, and so on and
Wow.
so forth.
Mhm.
I had no idea what these
Mhm.
credit cards were. I had never seen them before. One of them
Wow.
was opened when I was still living in another country and didn't have the credentials to be able to open credit in the country I was in. So I said, this is obviously fraud, right? This is
Right.
obviously fraud. Um, you know, I'm going to figure out what this is because it's a mistake and it will be dealt with, right? So
Solution.
I go home that day with the papers and I say, at this point there's a few other things that are happening, but again, because they're all happening in isolated pieces, I didn't have the whole picture at the time.
Okay.
So one side thing that was happening was that my ex-husband had always told me, like, whether we were car shopping or whatever we're doing, don't pull your credit score because it will lower your credit. Wait till we're ready to buy something. That was because he knew my credit score was already low and I didn't.
Because he was the one that
That
opened
had
these
just
credit cards?
had destroyed it. Yeah. Um,
Okay.
the second thing that was happening, sort of another side piece to this, was I was in a homestead that was purchased by my family for me, that he
Okay.
did not contribute towards financially.
Okay.
Um, in sort of preparation for our future and our family together, it was decided that we would sell this home and use it as a down payment towards we were in a condo, towards a family home. One of the things that happens when you do that is that money that is considered uh, that could not be, that homestead that predated the existence of the marriage would not be considered marital property that would be distributed on a 50-50 basis. However, if it was taken out of um, and used on a down payment towards, a family home, a marital home, it would then be able to be dissolved on a 50-50 basis. So these are two things that were happening on the side. Don't pull your credit, and let's get this money into another home, as in let's get this money into marital property that can be separated 50-50. Don't pull your credit because your credit score is lower than you know it is. So these
Wow,
are
he
two
was
financial things that are happening on the side.
yeah, he knew exactly what he was doing.
So
Um,
back to sort of the main issue.
mhm.
What happened, I come home with the papers and I say, something's wrong with my credit. This is going to mess up buying a house. So it just worked out that I accidentally, for the first time, pulled my credit score just to get my taxes filed for free. And it stopped me from selling this house and going to get a mortgage on another house, because I said, we have to fix the credit issue first. So, I had these sort of just interventions of timing that doesn't happen for everyone, but I was very lucky in that regard. And I say, I'm finishing the PhD, we have a baby. This is obviously a mistake. This is obviously fraud. This is a case of a stolen identity. Something's going on here. Look, I didn't even live in this country at the time that this credit card was open, that they're saying I owe this on, or I've had this many late payments on. I go, don't worry. Obviously, it's fraud. We'll deal with it. Leave the papers on the kitchen table. At this point, I didn't have time in that very moment, because of the baby and because I was finishing the PhD, to deal with that issue of my credit score. We had separated and were going through divorce proceedings by the time I was able to actually investigate it. And I investigated it with 3 major credit unions and essentially found out that 2 things had happened. One, my ex-husband had opened a number of credit cards under my name, and was racking up debt on them. And 2, on debt that he had already had on credit cards that predated us even meeting each other. He joined me onto those accounts as like the second responsible person on the account, so that
Wow.
I would then be responsible for that debt. And we
How
were living in a
much
place where marital debt is split 50-50 as well.
how much, if you don't mind sharing, like roughly how much money are we talking here? Did
You
he
know,
owe
I
in your name?
I've never been a numbers person, so I don't remember off the top of my head. But
Okay.
it was enough to, let's say it was enough to ruin my credit score, to make me ineligible to do things
Mhm.
like get a mortgage, lease a car, get a student loan, and so on and so forth.
Wow, okay.
So I would say, on the note of happy endings, that eventually
Mhm.
the
Yeah,
credit unions did determine that this was a case of fraud. And my
good.
credit was essentially fixed overnight. My credit score was essentially fixed overnight. And that doesn't always happen, because I've known other people, and I'm not really an expert on the area of finance, but I know other people that have, had not a similar situation, but had a situation where they had a low credit score, and it took years and years for them to be able to rebuild that credit score. So in that regard, again, I was very lucky that that was able to be fixed.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And let's continue on a happy note. So, in the end, you were able to get a divorce, correct?
Yes.
And you didn't have to be in the same country or go to court or see him again for that, right? You had a very I remember you told me you had like a very empathetic and experienced judge, and you got
Yeah. So
really
I
lucky.
had a judge that had been sitting on the bench for over 20 years,
Mhm.
specifically in family court. So she had been hearing family disputes constantly for 20 years. And I feel very lucky to have gotten such an experienced judge on the stand, because she had seen, these are the story I'm not telling you today. There might be some details that are different, but the general story is not unique. It's something that happens in relationships over and over again in one form or another. So she had seen this type of person. She had seen the narcissist character, um, who was, feeling however they were feeling negatively towards the career or education of their female spouse. This was not a unique situation for her. So I was able to get a very experienced judge on the bench, and she did a couple things that were, of course, legally justified, but were things that you don't see on a regular basis. One, she allowed that temporary order to relocate, um, based on the circumstances, and then she eventually granted it as a permanent order at the end of the case. She also made another order that allowed me to appear virtually
Mhm.
for my court hearing. This is almost unheard of. I mean, this is pre COVID days. Now there are some cases that are heard virtually, and that process has continued. But at this time, it was unheard of. To appear, really appearing virtually was a very, very rare thing to happen in this jurisdiction. And part of that was she simply said, "You created this immigration situation, yet expect me to make this person cross a border and possibly face an immigration issue
Mhm.
with a newborn when the whole reason that they had this immigration issue to begin with was because of your actions." So his actions in the end sort of came back to bite him in the behind, so to say.
Right.
Yes.
Karma.
Yes. So I was able to appear virtually. Of course, witnesses that, wherever they were would have to travel, but I was able to appear virtually, something he contested multiple times as sort of a form of continuing abuse, but the order did hold. And I never, from that time that I left on the temporary order to relocate, I never had to go back to that particular geographic region.
Yeah.
I was able to complete all of my hearings virtually.
Yeah.
And I was given, because of the pattern of abuse, I was given, they don't call it custody, but it's essentially full custody. They have
Mhm.
another word for it. It's full time sharing. But essentially, I have 365 days a year with my child. She has no overnights with him.
Mhm.
And if he wants to see her, he has to come to this other this other country, and he can only see her under supervision. So
Right.
I was, again, very lucky that I was able to um, speak for myself, that I was in a position where I could explain, and where my family had the financial resources to help me legally, um, that I was able to actually show the court what had happened in my marriage. And I know, not everyone is in that situation, but
Yeah.
I'm hoping that the people that are listening here today will, be able to pick up on some of these early red flags, to
Yeah. And
understand that incidents that happen in isolation, that are excused, where a person always plays themselves as a victim or puts the blame on someone else, is a situation that will accelerate over time. And most importantly, that you listen to your family and your friends, even if you think they're wrong. Remember that these people love you, and they can see something that you can't see from within your relationship yourself.
yeah, especially like you said, if you're noticing huge changes in their personality or even the way they speak to you or they treat you, um, and because a lot of it is like silent suffering. Like I remember when I saw you, there was silent suffering. Like you never complained, nothing. But I noticed. I'm like, who is this? This is not the Jasmine I know. Like I did notice that, but
And
I
it could
didn't
also be that
necessarily. Mhm.
you yourself didn't realize it at the time, right?
I
The person
didn't
in the relationship
realize.
might not even know they're suffering.
I didn't know, but I didn't know that, like, to the level you were suffering, no. And I also the last time I had seen you was before it progressed badly. But I do remember thinking, "This is not her personality." I noticed, like, major changes in you, and, a few other things just for privacy. You don't need to mention it here, but I think when you start noticing huge negative changes in your friends, you should talk to them, but at the end of the day, it's very difficult because, like what you said, you might have the partner telling them, "Oh, so and so is just jealous," or "So and so wish they had a relationship like us," or, there's a lot of manipulation that happens just to
Yeah,
try
it's
and
it's a
keep you from seeing.
daily form of manipulation.
Yep.
And
So,
I'd say for the people that are not going through relationships like these, you don't know if your friends are. So
mhm,
again, if I could kind of leave it on one note, take an interest in your friends' lives. Don't worry about, am I bothering them? Am I always having to chase them to be my friend? Am I
mm,
calling them too much? None of that matters. Your friend is your friend. Take an interest in them, call them, check on them. Let them know that you're there for them.
yes, absolutely. Always remind them that you're someone that they can lean on. Um, But I would tread carefully on, like, the thing is, it depends on your history or your vibe with them too. Like, I can call some friends 20 times a day, they don't care. But then other friends, it's like I wouldn't call, let's say, more than once or twice. But if I feel something is going on with them, I definitely make it known. Look, I'm here, try to talk to you, etc. But then there's just so much that an outside person can do. Again, like I said, it's harder when they're kind of suffering in silence. But what about resources actually, Jasmine? Like, do you have any resources online that helped you? Or I'm sure there's so many right now. We could look some up. Or if you have any experience with any like social services or any legal services that helped you, any kind of advice, you could let our audience know, or we could just leave it in the episode description.
Yeah, I think that's something probably we could review and maybe leave in a description some resources. The thing is, the resources will change from country to country. The
Yeah.
process, the legal process will change. The social services process will change. Whether therapy has a stigma or is accepted will change.
Mm-hmm.
What resources you can access will change based on your financial capabilities. So I say I don't have a definitive list.
Okay.
Um,
Well, we
Only that
could
I
see.
ask
Mm-hmm.
people to not examine their experiences in isolation. Because if you
Yeah.
excuse one experience at a time, when you excuse one experience at a time, it's easy to forgive, or it's easy to see that it's not a pattern. But when you
Yeah.
look at it's, and this is what happens when you leave a relationship, you're able to look back with 2020 hindsight and put all of the pieces together. And it
Yeah.
is a very difficult task when you're in this a situation like this, but you try to be more aware, be more alert.
Yes.
Think about the pieces that are happening in your life
Mm-hmm.
together. Think about them in a holistic way, and it may paint a different picture. Easier said
Sometimes,
than done, but.
no, I totally agree with you. I think sometimes like we have to zoom out and pretend you're on the outside and you're actually advising your friend about the situation. Or I also like to write things down or just conduct like some research on the issue. How have other people dealt with this, etc. Because when you read and you notice patterns, like let's say you notice like a narcissistic pattern, etc. Maybe if you had researched some of those things earlier, then you would have noticed that, okay, it's this kind of personality and, this is definitely just not for me and I need to get out as soon as possible, before I get married, before I get pregnant, etc.
I
Um,
mean, that's also something that I didn't touch on before.
mhm.
Really only thought about it when you mentioned it. But I did used to write things down. When we had an argument, I
Oh,
used to write
wow.
down what did I really want to tell this person, but I was prevented from telling them because they've blocked my number for the day, or you don't want to make it worse. So you, like you said, you suffer in silence. You don't say something. So I used to have a very good written record of what I was feeling or what the other person was
Wow.
saying. And this helped me down the road because one of the things that happens with trauma is the way our brain copes with trauma is sometimes we'll have this kind of like self-inflicted amnesia where we will forget the most traumatic things that happened to us as a coping mechanism.
Mhm.
Having
Yeah.
that written record, if you're able to do it, is and be able to go back and reflect on it, remind yourself of how you were feeling in that moment, is really an indispensable tool in dealing with these situations.
Yeah, writing is therapeutic for sure. Well, thank you so much. I'm so happy that you're in a new chapter of your life now. And hopefully you're ready to date again and you meet someone amazing that deserves you, appreciates you and your PhD and your gorgeous child and your amazing personality. Thank you so
Thank,
much for sharing your story. I really, really appreciate that.
thank you for having me.
Okay.
Bye bye.
Bye.